Then we'll interact a little bit, and then we'll just open it up to Q&A, so you can ask us questions, contribute points as you see fit. So first of all, I'm just going to invite Keith to sketch out a case for us for theism.
Okay, well, I'm glad to say I was here this morning to know Francesca, and I would say I don't. Got two academics never agree, so we're not going to agree about everything, but I totally agree with the method that she has to approach the questions. And I'm not going to talk about the Bible at all. So I broadly agree with what she said about the Bible. You might find that surprising, but I don't think you should have, because most theologians who are Christian, and not all theologians are Christian by any means, but most who are, would accept in general the approach that Francesca made. And I think it's a great pity that more Christians don't realise that. It's one of the great cultural gaps in our society. But I'm not talking about the Bible, because I regard the Bible as a whole set of different documents which give you various aspects of religion. As I said to Francesca, I spent some time studying Indian religions, and there's a remarkable similarity between the spectacle of Indian religions today and the sort of thing that Francesca was talking about. So that sort of view of religion is very much alive. But I'm a philosopher by trade, and my approach to religion came about really because I was taught quite a long time ago by A.J. Ayer, who I think you could well call a humanist. He probably was a humanist, I think. And Gilbert Ryle, who I don't think was a paid-up humanist, but he certainly was, wouldn't come under the heading of humanist. And I find some of the philosophical arguments so disputable and indeed mistaken that it led me to be attracted to theism as a philosophical view. So that's, I've only got 15 minutes, but that's what I'm going to talk about, a philosophical approach to theism. And why should you take that approach? Well, first of all, if you look at the history of philosophy, most philosophers have been theists. That is, they have believed that this universe is the product of a vast, intelligent mind, like reality. And that's what I take God to be. And so my early work was on Immanuel Kant, for example, and he certainly believed in God, and he certainly thought you had to believe in God, and there were very good arguments for believing in God. And Kant is totally misunderstood, I might say, if it's thought that he destroyed all the arguments for God, because he gave them what I think are very good arguments for God. He didn't like the sort of argument that you get in Aquinas' 5 ways, and you probably know enough about Kant to know that that is true. But Kant spent his whole life trying to defend and put on a firmer footing the discipline of metaphysics, of saying what the nature of reality is. And his defense was in the end reason. A reasonable person has to believe that reality is not what it appears to us to be. That it belongs in a realm which you call noumenal, which means mind-like, which is beyond what we perceive and know, and it has the characteristics of moral demand and rational intelligibility. So he thought two of the very basic views that most scientists have about the universe, and most philosophers have had about the universe in the past at least, is that morality is objectively demanding, and we don't just make it up and decide what it should be. We feel some things we ought to do, whether we like it or not. And the universe is objectively intelligible. That is, it's not just that we have to understand bits of it, it is intrinsically comprehensible, and that is an incredible fact. And these two things are the two pillars of theism, I think. I mean, you could say there's a third pillar, which is based on religious experience. And just to connect a little bit with what Francesca said, while I agree with what she said, there was one thing missing because it wasn't what she was interested in. But there is the question of what sorts of experiences underlie the various, very often primitive, morally and rationally, beliefs that were formulated and rituals that they had. And I think rituals are connected closely with various sorts of things that I would want to call transcendent experiences, or experiences of transcendence. And I'd want to put that as a third feature of religious life, that some of us probably about 50% of populations, according to most polls that are taken on this, have a sense that there are experiences which are of a transcendent reality. That is, something other than the sensory and the physical, and of greater value than merely the sensory or the physical, but which is nevertheless mediated through the sensory and physical. And that's a very basic predisposition that some humans, including me, have. And we have that sense, and we have the option of saying, well, it's just an illusion. I've tried very hard to believe that, and I can't bring myself to think that's just an illusion. Or saying there's something in there, there is something more to reality as it is experienced than simply the physical. It's something to do with value, it's something to do with morality, it's something to do with beauty, beauty in art and beauty in nature. And in those experiences you feel, well, it's something beyond the veil of appearance. So that's what I want to focus on. My defense of God would be that the physical gives you a veil. It says to you things that we know not to be true, like we all think that we're sitting in this room and we're made of three-dimensional solid beings which have various colours, for example. And a physicist will say, well, none of those things are objectively true. They are constructs of the brain. I would prefer to say the mind, but there we are, they are constructs, whatever they are. And reality in itself doesn't consist of small, solid objects in three dimensions. I was talking to a world-famous physicist recently, and he said, well, no, what actually exists are probably small, wavy sort of superstrings in 11 dimensions. And we don't look like that, it's not the way we look. So reality is very different from appearance. And I think all respectable physics now takes that for granted. The theorems of quantum mechanics are very different from anything we think to be true that appears to us in our physical experiences. Well, that's okay, that doesn't get you to God, of course. But it does get you to the thought that reality is different from appearance, that it underlies appearance, and it raises the question, what's the nature of that reality? And it does seem to be, I thought, supremely intelligible. The problem, evil, of course, and suffering is a big one for us, but not for a physicist, because a physicist can say, well, these things arise from the laws of physics, and the laws of physics are chosen because they are beautiful and elegant and mathematically intelligible, and if you make that assumption, they usually turn out to be true. You have to try to confirm by experience, but sometimes even that confirmation is not very apparent to the ordinary man and woman, like what would we do if we were at the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva and we were told to look for a Higgs boson. I think most of us would be at a loss to know what we would do. Its observation is not quite as straightforward as just looking at something. So here's a big ideological or theoretical claim that reality is different from appearance. If you don't start there, you're not going to get to God anyway. The word God is not used in all the religions of the world, and as Francesca was saying, it's a rather late development. Monotheistic God is a slightly late development within the Hebrew tradition and in the Bible. God is not necessary. It's not a necessary word to use. So I'd rather think about a mind-like reality which is apprehensible in the intelligibility of nature, in the beauty of art and nature, and in certain experiences that we have of something that is mind-like, which seems to us, to put it in the words used by Matthew Arnold, a power greater than ourselves making for righteousness. And some of us do have what seems to be that sense. So a lot of this is based on the sort of experiences you have. As a philosopher, I'm an empiricist to start with. I think all knowledge derives from experience. That's where I start, a very traditional English position. I think most humanists might agree with that. And you say all knowledge begins from experience. But then the big question is, and what is the nature of experience? And that's the big question. And I am personally convinced, not because of anything it says in the Bible or any ancient text of any sort like that, I'm personally convinced that the nature of experience is wider than the sensory perceptions of physical reality which we take to be common sense. So if any view is wrong about the world, it's common sense. And any physicist will corroborate that straight away. What common sense says is almost always wrong. So we're looking for something crazy. So religion is quite a good option there, you think. It was Niels Bohr, after all, one of the greatest physicists of all time, who said some theories are not acceptable because they're not weird enough. And I'd say that about religion. You've got to have something weird. You've got to have something. You've got to look at what might underlie this apparently commonsensical reality in which we live. Is it mind-like? And I'd say, well, God is a word. We invented the word God, of course, there it is. It's a concept invented by us. But then remember, mathematics is invented by us, but it just happens to be true. Right? So the fact that something is invented by us doesn't mean it's false. If the invention is a good one, it's going to be true, probably. So with God. Religion, God is invented by us. That says nothing about whether it's true or not. It has no relevance to that question. So, is it true? Is it true that there is a God? Well, what you'd be asking then is, I want to put this in a vague way, you see. I don't want to make it too precise. I do not want to start in talking about God. I'm a priest, I worship God, that's what I do. I have to do rituals to do with God. Right, now what am I having rituals with regard to? Well, nothing conceptually precise. Not anything goes, of course, and I would immediately say any views of God which involve anything that I would think of as immoral, I would reject. By definition, I'd reject that. I wouldn't have that in my concept of God. Any views which I regard as factually in error, I wouldn't have that as well. Well, what have I got left? Well, I've got quite a lot left. I've got that the reality underlying our common sense sensory experiences of the world is a reality which is vastly intelligible, which is mathematically beautiful, which gives a sense of value or moral demand. But if we think, some of us anyway, that when we talk about morality, we're not talking about conventions that we invent, we're talking about something which seems objectively to exert a pressure upon us. And if we think about it, then we sometimes think, well, I believe this more strongly than I ought to if I didn't believe there was an objective moral pressure in the world, that I have to be compassionate for all sentient beings. That's one of the highest moral perceptions I can think of. So I'd include that in my concept of God. Because I didn't invent the concept of God, but there are a range of concepts, and people do disagree a little. So most people who use the word God are going to believe that this is a moral power, but because people's moral beliefs differ considerably, just like the gay issue, people do just differ morally, never mind what their religious beliefs are. People who differ morally about this will think that God agrees with them, all right? And you will say, when you construct the idea of God, it must involve the highest moral perceptions that I have. I myself, in agreement with most of my theological colleagues who are Christians in Britain, let's just leave it at that, would say, well, that means that God is going to be in favour of universal compassion, compassion for all sentient beings. And any view which doesn't say that is not about God at all. So that's part of how we're going to define the word God. We'd also say any view which is opposed to science, like creationism, isn't about anything we would call God. We wouldn't do that because you wouldn't put anything that we regard as factually false in that idea of God. So you have to differentiate. Some people who believe in God believe in a sort of malevolent tyrant who sends earthquakes on people he doesn't like. All right, but that's not how I've used the word God. Presumably they think that sort of thing is moral and factually supportable. I don't think that at all. But that doesn't lead me to reject the idea of God. It leads me to reject their idea of God and reaffirm my own idea of God, which is very widely shared by my colleagues, but still a minority view overall, I expect, which is that God embodies the highest values that you can think of and the deepest insights into the nature of reality. In that case, I think, yes, the highest values, that's universal compassion and the fulfillment of human flourishing, welfare. I think, to that extent, I would want to call myself a humanist, though Stephen wouldn't let me do that, I don't think. But I want to say that because I think morality is about human flourishing, and it's about the universal human flourishing. And then intelligibly, I'd want to say, I believe that this universe is intelligible, that it can be understood, that it works on rational principles. And I would construe that by saying, well, that is very consonant with the idea of an intelligence which makes it the way it is, which we try to understand. So what I wanted to say is, well, God is, the concept of God develops, it changes. Francesca has been a very good way of saying, well, what happened before real monotheism arose? And people had different concepts, which I think were to do with the transcendent quality of their experiences, and were morally what we would call very primitive, I think, or unacceptable, certainly, and didn't have much idea of what the factual nature of the world was. But the idea of God has developed a lot since then. So I want to go for the best idea we have, and say I think it's a rational and integrated one. So if you have to confirm such an idea by experience, then you'd want to have experiences which seem to be, to you, of a being who makes immense moral demands, but also offers some sort of hope of moral fulfillment, of human flourishing, and who underlies the intelligibility of the universe. So my argument for God is not that there is a pre-designed, pre-packaged idea of God which you have to believe. It is that if you're talking about the idea of God, you're talking about what it is that you hold to be of greatest value and give you the greatest insight into the nature of reality. And I think the history of philosophy, to me, shows that this is likely to be a view which takes you beyond the world of appearances into a deeper underlying world of reality. And in many ways it looks at that world is mind-like. It's not unconscious, it's not accidental, it's not just things which happen without rhyme or reason, as though it was all mere chance. It has elements of necessity and rationality about it. And I think that's a view which, even if it's a minority view, even among theists, all theists would agree with, to the extent that they would agree that God, what you call God, has to be of the highest moral value. People just disagree about that, unfortunately, and has to be of the greatest factual insight. People disagree about that. But don't lumber me with an idea of God which is immoral and plainly empirically false. I wouldn't have such an idea. And I can only say, I didn't make this up. It's an idea believed by a large number of people you would probably call liberal theologians. So I would want to fight in this world for a great understanding between people of different faiths who can adopt a liberal developmental view of the idea of God, or a cognate idea of a supreme spiritual reality, even if they don't like the word God. And I myself would be very glad to include many humanists in this category.
This earlier, somebody left their camera lying around. I look familiar. See me afterwards. Right. Okay, so I'm not going to engage Keith directly just yet. I'll just set up my own stall independently to begin with. Keith mentioned philosophical arguments, a philosophical case for the existence of God. And he mentioned that most philosophers have been theists. Yeah, not nowadays. The Phil Paper survey recently, a few years ago, was a survey of professional philosophers and graduate students. It found that less than 15% of professional philosophers are any sort of theist at all nowadays. Why is that? Well, because the case against God is really very good indeed. The case for is very weak. So let me just sketch out for you something of the case on either side. Usually if you ask people, why do you believe in God, they will run one or two very familiar arguments. They might say, well look around you. Look at the starry heavens above. look at all of this wonder before us. Where did it come from? What explains its existence? Why is there something rather than nothing at all? So they're running some kind of cosmological or first cause argument. Now, this kind of argument, not taken seriously by professional philosophers, but the thing I also want to point out about this argument is that even if it established the existence of some kind of first cause or prime mover, it is a huge and, as it stands, unwarranted further leap to draw the conclusion that this first cause or prime mover, or whatever it might happen to be, is the Judeo-Christian God, is a supremely benevolent and supremely powerful deity. Why does the first cause have to be a God, have to be a person? Even if it has to be a person, why does it have to be a good person? That argument, as it stands, provides us with no clue at all so far as the moral character of the Creator is concerned. The same goes for other very popular arguments. Currently it's very popular to argue for God using some form of fine-tuning argument, a kind of design argument. Look around you, look at the universe and the way it's constructed. Notice that if the cosmological constants were just very, very slightly different, if the levers of the universe had just been tweaked very slightly into different positions, then we wouldn't be here, there would be no planets, there would be no stars, and so on. You have to really fine-tune your universe to produce a universe like this that is capable of supporting intelligent beings such as ourselves. Now, what are the chances that the universe should be set up in such a way that the levers should be in just that position? What are the chances that the universe should have the Goldilocks property of being just right for life? Astronomically low, if it's just by chance. Far more likely then, far more reasonable to suppose that there's some intelligence back there that fine-tuned the universe, that placed those levers in just the right position. Is that a good argument? I don't think so, but again, even if it were a good argument for there being some kind of intelligent designer behind the existence of the universe, again, why does it have to be a god? Why couldn't this universe have been engineered by the inhabitants of a previous universe? Even if it's a god, why does it have to be a good god? Again, this argument gives us no clue whatsoever so far as the moral character of the fine-tuner is concerned. So what I'm doing here is I'm drawing your attention to the fact that very many of, I'd say most of the most popular arguments for the existence of God give us no real reason to think that God is good at all. And yet God is good by definition, so far as very, very many theists are concerned. We're talking about a being that is conceived of as being supremely powerful, omnipotent, all-knowing, omniscient, and supremely benevolent. These are not good arguments for such a being. Worse still, there appears to be very good evidence against the existence of such a being. There is the problem of evil, as it's known. Actually, there are two problems of evil. There's the logical problem, and there's the evidential problem. And it's the evidential problem really that we need to focus on here. So the suggestion is that if we look at the universe, we find that it contains quite extraordinary amounts of evil, or if you prefer, suffering. Okay, we can leave the word evil out of it. Let's just focus on the suffering. We human beings have occupied this planet for around about 200,000 years. For almost the entire sweep of that history, your chances of making it beyond your 5th birthday as a member of this species were not good. Around about 1/3 to 1/2 of every generation of human children would have died, usually pretty horribly, of a disease, of starvation and so on. They would have suffered horribly. Their parents would have suffered horribly as they had to watch their child die before them. They were helpless to do anything about it. For around about the entire sweep of human history, that has been going on. And that all by itself surely looks like pretty good evidence that there is no supremely powerful and supremely benevolent deity deity in charge of this particular universe. That's an example of the evidential problem of evil. We appear to have here very good evidence against the existence of a god like that. Keith mentioned a veil. Maybe there's a veil across reality. On this side of the veil there's the empirically observable realm, the realm about which perhaps common sense will draw conclusions, has drawn conclusions, but we need to show a little humility. We need to remember there are more things in heaven and earth than we've ever taught in our philosophy. We need to remember that there could be stuff behind the veil. Who knows what is behind the veil, you know? Now, I'm all for humility, and I'm prepared to acknowledge that there are more things in heaven and earth than I'm capable of understanding. But still, we can quite reasonably rule out various hypotheses about what is behind the veil, even if we don't know actually what is behind the veil, okay? So here's a hypothesis that we can quite reasonably rule out as far as what's behind the veil is concerned. Consider the belief that there is an all-powerful and supremely malevolent deity, an evil god, if you like. Just the one god, and this is his creation, and his moral depravity is beyond our comprehension. His cruelty and sadism is greater than we could ever understand. Is there a God like that? Who believes in a God like that? Nobody. Not if they're sane. Why not? I mean, after all, this universe was fine-tuned, and the existence of such a deity would very neatly explain its fine-tuned character. God fine-tuned this universe to produce intelligent, conscious beings that he could then torture, as of course he does. The existence of a fine-tuned universe would be just as neatly explained by an evil God. The existence of the universe at all, the fact that it exists rather than fails to exist, would also be explained by an evil God. He created the universe and then populated it in order to torture its inhabitants. So these arguments that I sketched out right at the beginning, they appear to be just as good arguments for an evil God as a good God, and yet none of you believe in an evil God. Why not? Because there's too much love, laughter, ice cream and rainbows. That's why. Look out the window. Yeah, I know there's horror on a vast scale, but the fact is there's an awful lot of nice stuff in this world. Stuff that an evil God would never allow. Okay? And that provides you with ample evidence that if there's some deity back there behind the veil, right, it's not that one. You can cross that one off our list, because we know that if there were a deity like that behind the veil, then what we observe on this side should be very different from what we actually observe. Okay? This is not the kind of world that such a deity would create. But then in much the same way, we can cross out the all-powerful, all-good God hypothesis too, right? Too much bad stuff this side of the veil. That's excellent evidence against the existence of a good God back there behind the veil. Maybe there's a God back there who just doesn't give a shit, right? Who's powerful, doesn't give a shit. Or maybe there's a team of gods and they're incompetent. There are all sorts of hypotheses we might here consider, and I'm not ruling those out, but I'm ruling out the Judeo-Christian God as traditionally conceived, and I'm ruling out the evil God for much the same reasons, and of course you all rule out the evil God for much that kind of reason, and so you bloody well should be ruling out the good God too, for much the same kind of reason. And the real mystery to me is not whether or not there is a God like that. The real mystery is how anyone could reasonably believe that there was. I mean, that's what I truly find puzzling. There's abundant evidence that this world is not the creation of the Judeo-Christian God. Now, in the face of evidence to the contrary, you might, I suppose, how am I doing for time? Got a couple of minutes. You might appeal to something like subjective experience. You might say, but Stephen, this is a very popular view currently in epistemology, you can know things without evidence. The view that you need evidence in order to reasonably believe something, that's called evidentialism. And actually it's true, many philosophers now reject evidentialism. If it seems to me that there's a green pen in my hand, then other things are being equal. I have no reason to think there's anything funny going on with smoke and mirrors or whatever. It's reasonable for me to believe that there's a green pen there. Similarly then, if it seems to me that there is a God and he's letting me know that he exists right now, then unless I have some reason to think there's something funny going on, it's perfectly reasonable for me to believe that there is a God and that he is revealing himself to me via some kind of sensus divinitatis, or God sense. So perhaps we can know that there's a God even in the absence of any kind of good argument or evidence for the existence of God. Currently a very fashionable position in philosophy of religion. For those who are lucky enough to have such religious experiences, it can be perfectly reasonable to believe in God. I reject that view. First of all, that might be true if it weren't for the case that, first of all, there's ample evidence that there is no such deity, and I've just outlined for you. Secondly, there's a pretty good defeater for, as it's known, for any kind of belief grounded in that kind of experience, that kind of experience of some kind of external mind letting itself be known to me. Human beings have a quite extraordinary track record of believing in hidden agency. So an agent is a being with beliefs on desires and desires on which it may more or less rationally act. We are all agents, of course, but there are non-human agents. There are tigers and squirrels and so on, cats and dogs, many kinds of agency. It's extraordinary the extent to which human beings believe in hidden agency of one sort or another, believing that the dead walk amongst us, that there are nature spirits, there are gods, and so on and so forth. More recently, that there are aliens. And we suppose that these hidden agents that are operating in our environment have extraordinary powers and have extraordinary faculties, and also that some of us, it's posited, have the ability to somehow know that they're there. So some people, Psychic Sally will be doing the rounds in the autumn, and she, lucky for her, she has the ability to know that the dead are in the room with her and she can communicate with them. She has a spiritual sense. Other religious people have a God sense that allows them to know about various gods or a god by means of some sort of supernatural mechanism. Now, given that we have this extraordinary propensity to believe in hidden agency, we might ask what explains it and what are the consequences so far as beliefs grounded in that kind of mechanism are concerned. There is a lot of work now going on in the cognitive science of religion which actually aims to explain this strange tendency of human beings to believe in hidden agency. There is, for example, Justin Barrett, who I invited here a couple of years ago to talk about that actually. He's a psychologist. He came up with the HADD, the Hyperactive Agency Detecting Device. The Hyperactive Agency Detecting Device is something that you've got in here. We've all got one. I'm not endorsing this, I'm just to illustrate, okay? When we were on the savannah long ago, we needed to be super aware of agents, other agents in our environment, because they could be mates or competitors or saber-toothed tigers that might eat us, right? If you miss an agent that's there, you might die. You'll certainly pay a very high price, or you may very well pay a very high price. On the other hand, if you over-detect agency, if you tend to detect agency when there isn't one there, you don't really lose very much. So as a natural consequence then, we have evolved to be super sensitive to agency, to the extent that when you go home this evening in the dark and you hear a rustle in the bushes behind you, the first thing you think is, there's someone there. You can't turn that off. It's hardwired into you. It's part of your evolutionary heritage. And when you can't see anyone, you might still think, I can't see them. But still, I'm inclined to think there's someone there. Okay, so Justin Barrett, a psychologist, offers this particular explanation for why it is that we massively over-detect agency. We see agency everywhere, even when there is none. We look up at the stars at night perhaps and go, ooh, maybe there's someone back there. Right? It's a product of this part of our evolutionary heritage. Now, I'm not endorsing that explanation, but I am pointing out that what it explains is true. We are hugely prone to false beliefs in hidden agency. The vast majority of these beliefs are not true, we know that. But that means then that anyone who knows this should immediately be highly distrustful of any belief in hidden agency based on their own subjective experience. You have what's known in epistemology as a defeater for any such belief when you come into possession of this new information. And so I am suggesting that even if you put evidence for God to one side and say, but I just know, in the way that George Bush did. I mean, his census divitatus was in his gut and it told him to invade Iraq. But I just know that God is real and God is communicating with me. Anyone who's having that kind of experience and basing their belief on it is doing so irrationally, given this new information, it seems to me. You shouldn't trust your good experiences. And I would encourage Keith not to trust his.
Okay, well, that just demonstrates that philosophers never agree. It's not something unusual. But I'll just make two quick points. First of all, about Justin Barrett. I don't think Stephen said that Justin Barrett is in fact an evangelical Christian. So he didn't draw the same conclusions from his had that Stephen did. And I think I agree with Justin that if it's true that we have a hyperactive detection device in our brains, it's probably God put it there and that indeed it is true. That there is an agency all the time and it's God for us. And that's what Justin actually thinks, and so do I. What?
You're absolutely right.
Oh, all right. About evil, well, of course, this is the big one. And we know that evil's a big problem for theists. We do. What I would say about this is, look, I don't start from the view that God is omnipotent and omniscient. I start from the view that God is a mind-like reality underlying this one. Now, does it look as though God's omnipotent and omniscient? And I'd say, no, it doesn't, actually. So I think I agree with Stephen that human existence is a mixture of absolute beauty and absolute horror. And wherever explanation you go for has to take both those two things into account. What do I renounce? I renounce omnipotence. I say God, in the words of A.N. Whitehead, is the fellow sufferer who understands rather than the one who puts punishment on you for various things that you've done wrong. So the way this world is, it just has to be that destruction and destructiveness occur. That's the way it is. We are all the results of the explosions of stars, and they're not very pretty for people who are near about them, and that's the way it is. And so I would say, I think there is a mind-like reality, but in common with a lot of my colleagues actually, I would say the word omnipotent is, well, I shouldn't say this in this company, but it's not a biblical word. But I would say it's not necessarily God, that God should, in some sense, and it would be a very sophisticated sense, be able to do anything that was logically possible. And I'd say, actually, theologians and philosophers have never agreed on how to define omnipotence, and I'm prepared to give it up and say God is the most powerful possible being there could ever be. But if we're going to exist, we have to exist in a world like this, and that carries suffering and destructiveness with it, and that's the way it is. So I am renouncing something of Stephen's God, but I'm leaving my God intact, if rather upset.
I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm just going to very quickly do it. So Keith's absolutely right about Justin Barrett. He's a Christian, and he doesn't think what he has discovered debunks, sort of naturalistically debunks Christian or theistic belief. But that wasn't my argument. Okay, so if you're really interested, email me and I will send you the paper that I've currently got under submission on, this kind of argument. You could run a kind of naturalistic debunking argument against religious belief, which goes something like, or we can explain this belief naturalistically, therefore it's probably not true. Right? The mechanisms that would account for the belief will account for it whether or not it's true. And so there's no particular reason to think that it is true now, given that we have a naturalistic explanation for why we would hold it. So you could offer that kind of argument, which I think you should rightly dismiss, but it ain't mine. Right? My argument was different. My argument is a defeater argument. My argument is that whether or not the HADD explanation is correct, I don't know whether it is. My point is that once you know that human beings are highly prone to false beliefs on a given subject matter under given circumstances, then if you form your belief on that subject matter under those circumstances, you should at that point, on giving this new information, you should then withhold belief. So for example, if you see a snake in the grass, before you right now, it's perfectly reasonable for you to believe that there's a snake there. But if I tell you that I've given you a drug that causes snake hallucinations which are indistinguishable from the real thing, and you have every reason to believe me, it is now no longer reasonable for you to believe that there's a snake on the grass in front of you. I've just supplied you with a defeater for your belief. You can no longer trust that particular mechanism when it comes to that particular belief anymore. And the fact that human beings are similarly highly prone, constitutionally prone, to false beliefs in visible agents when those beliefs are based on subjective experience immediately gives you a defeater for your belief in such an agent based on subjective experience. That's my argument, and I'll stand by it. So now we should have some Q&A, I think. Okay. So, what can you do it? Will you do it? Can I do it?
Yeah, but it's just a matter of...
Start on one side.
Where should I start? Okay, let's start there.
Would you consider yourself a Christian?
Please ask him to stand up. It's very
Could you stand up and...
Would you consider yourself a Christian?
I'm a priest of the Church of England. I don't know what you would make of that. Yeah, perhaps I'm going to go back.
Just to pick up on the hyperactive agency detection device, to sort of take that forward, psychologically we're talking about theory of mind, or as Dan Dennett would have it, something slightly like the phrase theory of mind. And what we, subsequent to Barrett's findings, have tended to find is that it is engaged by experiencing something in the world around you that you can't immediately understand. So this doesn't make sense to me, I'm going to engage this ability to try and understand it. And it seems like the main reason for doing it was because humans hold false beliefs or beliefs that are different than mine, and so that's the best way to understand other humans, and that's why sometimes when things happen that aren't human, but that are difficult to understand, we sort of superimpose a human-like or anthropomorphic agency onto it. And you've effectively said that by saying that reality is intelligible, something mind-like in nature. So you've effectively said that you're projecting your mind out into something you don't understand, and then somehow reifying the thing that comes back, which is your own mind, ultimately, and saying that's a thing outside of me, when clearly it's a thing internal to you that you've projected out to try and come to an understanding. Not helped by the fact that you've got a book that tells you that people in the past have done that and have reified it, and have got a God that they've invented to explain this sensation. And so now it's a reasonable thing to believe that that's something outside of oneself. But now we've got a fairly good psychological underpinning to suggest that it's not reasonable to reify that thing, or deify that thing, if you will, and that it's just your way of coming to understand your surroundings, and you're just noticing that it seems a little bit like a person.
What's the question? Ask it. Give us a question.
Okay, so I guess the question ultimately is, how can you say with any degree of certainty that it's not, the veil, whichever side of the veil it is not just down to your sensory experience and your attempts to make sense of something, and that what you're making sense of is just those things coming back to you that emanate from you in the first instance?
Okay, right. Well, I think that, as I said, all human language and thought is constructed by humans. We don't get given it from somewhere else. So it doesn't worry me that everything is a construction of our minds. I mean, that is precisely what I would believe, as a matter of fact. But the very thought that things are constructed of our minds makes me think that minds are a fundamental aspect of reality. Right? So I think that's just apparent. I think minds are not reducible to purely physical phenomena. So that's a general philosophical belief I have, whether or not I believe in God. So I wouldn't go along with your suggestion that I'm just projecting something anthropomorphic, actually, because by mind I don't necessarily mean something human. I think of thought, and my paradigm of thought might be mathematics or logic, right? And you say, does it look as though the universe is based on something mathematical or logical? Well, to me it does, and that's how it seems. So, can I just give you a quote? I won't go on, but I'll give you a quote from Roger Penrose, who was professor of mathematics at Oxford. He says, I haven't said this often enough, he said, but I have always believed, actually, that until physics talks about the mental aspect of the universe, it will be complete. That's my feeling. So everything's a projection, if you like, but that doesn't take away from the objectivity that you're trying to understand. Okay, can we, I'm looking for, yes, right, I'm dead.
Shall I start? So I am a particle physicist, and I didn't work on the Large Hadron Collider, but a different one. And when I was there, especially in my first year of my PhD, I was thinking, well, how can we be really sure we haven't fooled ourselves, you know, kind of classic Richard Feynman, that we haven't imagined with us. And of course I came to the conclusion we hadn't, because we looked at it in all these really systematic ways which eliminate that common sense bias you talked about, maths, logic, self-criticism. I'm still an academic, not in particle physics, so forgive me if I feel I'm allowed to be rude to a fellow academic, and I haven't been to this kind of event before, but I've never heard so many non sequiturs as I heard in your talk, and it seemed to come down to an argument that I can imagine a God in my head and nothing you can say can convince me otherwise. So why bring up in a kind of terrible sort of Deepak Chopra level sort of, you know, invocation of physics and maths, the idea that the world is intelligible, that mathematics is beautiful and wonderful, and yet reject all the methods that we know of how to make it so.
Well, most of what I got about particle physics is from Oxford particle physicists who have conferences on things like multiverses and theories of cosmology and quantum cosmology. And all I can say is, and you must surely admit that this is true, in such conferences people do talk seriously about possible explanations for why the basic laws of the universe are the way they are. The multiverse is a very popular one, but actually it is thought to be by most physicists I know to be a sensible, if false, hypothesis that there is an intelligence which has set up this particular universe the way it did. Well, I find that the last conference I went to in Oxford, quite a large number of physicists would say, you say no, how can you say no? I mean, that's just true.
We didn't just make it up. We didn't just invent it. We didn't just dream it.
Sorry?
We didn't just feel it.
Feel it?
They didn't just feel it. They didn't just imagine.
Oh, I see. It's the lack of experimental evidence you're talking about.
No, not
I mean, there's certainly...
Yeah, it would be good. I mean, it's all a bit hand-wavy at the moment.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, beauty, how do you explain that? Oh, intelligibility, how do you explain that? And, you know, just because we're struggling a bit to explain something, hardly it means that we have to wheel God in order to account for it. That's just sort of one of the gaps kind of argument, and presumably Keith's got something a bit better than that up his sleeve.
Yeah, I think that.
So maybe you could whip it out for us.
I'll give you one book which you know very well, Martin Rees, Only Six Numbers, and Martin says that this is a real puzzle about why that's true, and he prefers the multiverse theory, but he does say it would be wrong to say there's no possible explanation, and there could be others. Okay. Well, okay, we will disagree, but I just record my experience that there are a number of particle physicists in Oxford who think this is not absurd.
Yeah, pick another one.
I'll just like you.
Okay.
Oh, okay, well, okay. You've got your hand up there, you're the only person.
Two points. The first one, I'm actually a little surprised that Keith said he doesn't believe that God is omnipotent and omniscient, because that would suggest that he is God is subject to science and would become what David Bentley Hart calls demiurge, which begs the old question, who made God? The second point, I just wanted to know on both parts, of both as an atheist and a theist point, I'm very suspicious about the ideas both of the self and of free will, and indeed the idea that there are separate events in the universe, and I wondered whether if you agree and believe in any or all of those.
Yeah, again, big philosophical issues. I do believe in libertarian freedom of the will and in the existence of a substantial self, that's true. I agree with Stephen, I'm probably in a minority of philosophers at the present time. But our day will come.
Philosophers of religion, on the other hand, about 70% of them are Christian. Again, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm doing this. I keep forgetting.
Hi, I have sort of two questions. The first one would be, you said that you were Christian, but in your presentation, your arguments were mostly for sort of pantheistic, maybe deistic God. So how do you get from that to the Christian God? And my second question is, can you imagine living in an unintelligible universe? I mean, you said that one of your arguments was that, you know, we live in an intelligible universe, therefore there must be a cause for it. But I have a sort of an anthropological principle. We could invoke the anthropic principle for that, and say that, well, we have to live in such a universe. So I'm just wondering how you would respond to those two things.
The second one is pretty straightforward. Many people think we do live in an unintelligible universe. That's one in which you cannot frame universal laws of physics. And you say, well, things just happen, and that's the way it is, and there aren't any universal laws at all. It's not true that every cause has the same effect. Right. So that will be taken to extremes in an unintelligible universe. Christianity I'd rather not go into, basically. But I will say this, that of course I believe in God because I'm a Christian rather than the other way around. Can we have one for Stephen? Stephen.
I'm an atheist and I understand the burden of proof and largely agree with your argument. But I think as a philosopher, you need to work a bit harder before you can dismiss God from the problem of suffering. Because in a world of suffering, it allows scope to for things like nobility and courage to manifest, and compassion, and caring for others. Because in a hypothetically perfect world, you wouldn't have the opportunity to show such qualities.
Yes. I'm wondering how much to say about this, because I could go on all night. So I wrote a paper. So this evil God hypothesis, if you're interested in it, you can see the paper, The Evil God Challenge, which I wrote, which discusses all of this in great depth. One of the reasons why I wrote the paper was precisely to deal with, actually, the kind of explanation that you're now offering. So, of which there are many. Theists have had thousands of years to cook up these stories, these explanations for why there's so much pain and suffering. So, free will is often invoked. Let's just focus on that one. God gave us free will. He could have made us puppet beings that always did the good thing. But if you're a puppet being, you're not morally responsible for what you do, and so moral goodness with a capital M and a capital G won't exist in your universe, and it's particularly important for a good God that it does. So he will cut the strings, and as a result of him cutting the strings, we can then do terrible things to each other, and some of us do, and that partially explains some of the evil, some of the suffering that exists in the universe. Or you might say, in order for a good to exist in the universe, moral good, I need to be able to help other people. That requires I live in a stable, law-governed universe. I need to know that when you're cold and hungry, that if I strike a fire, it will cause a flame, the flame will cause heat, the heat will warm you up, it will cook the food will nourish you, and so on. So I need to live in a stable, law-governed universe. But those laws then produce movements of tectonic plates, which produce earthquakes and terrible disasters, and so on. So again, we have now an explanation for some of this bad stuff. And to that I say, let's consider an evil God. An evil God, why would he allow some people to do good things, you know, like Mother Teresa? Wandering the slums of Calcutta, reducing suffering, as she didn't. Let's say she did. I'm sure that's the sort of behaviour an evil God would clamp down on straight away. He won't allow people to do good. Yes, he will. Why? Evil God could have made us puppet beings that always did the evil thing. But if we're puppet beings, the evil, the bad things we do will not be moral evil. Moral evil is something that an evil God would want to exist in this universe, therefore he cut the strings. And that allows us to do evil of our own volition, which is exactly what he wants. But unfortunately, Mother Teresa then goes around doing good stuff. It's the price he pays. It's the same explanation when you're laughing, which you should, because it's ridiculous. But it's the Christian explanation. Or, evil God wants me to do horrendous moral things. In order to do horrendous moral things, I need to live in a stable, law-governed universe. I need to know that when I light the match, it'll produce a flame. That when I pour the petrol through your letterbox, there'll be a terrible explosion, and that you will all die horribly in the resulting inferno. Now, those laws unfortunately produce beautiful sunsets, which is abundant from the point of view of an evil God, but it's the price he has to pay for these moral horrors. So you can see that there's a kind of symmetry now between these two sets of explanations. On each side we have the problem of good, the problem of evil, we then have theodicies, you have theodicies. It's the same. Neither of these hypotheses is considerably more reasonable than the other. They are both way down the scale of reasonableness. Cross them off your list.
Okay, let's go back. There you are, around this. You. Sorry, you. Yeah. You've got your hand up still, yeah.
Wait for the microphone.
Oh, yes. Okay, so the microphone should be...
Can you... That's a very interesting question, we'll hear it in a minute. So, who was it that's going to ask?
Thank you. Thank you for such a brilliant talk. You said down lumbering to certain categories. I think what would be interesting if there was like a world court which could try and put on trial the Christian Church, the Church of England, in your case, for the crimes against poverty of the mind and material poverty, and the crimes against the middle class and the working class.
What's the question?
Also the terrible crimes against homosexual groups and women. And I'd like to see, would you agree that if we put the church on trial, people like yourself and bishops, etc., then atheists could actually then classify you and try you and see what position really you do stand for after you present evidence to court and maybe put to prison for those terrible crimes. Thank you. So the question is, do you believe in a world...
possibly sent to prison for the crimes of
Yeah, for the crimes of the church of the last 1,000 years and today across the world. Do you think there should be a world court around like yourself?
I think everyone is responsible for their own beliefs, and they should be judged on what their beliefs are. I don't think that I would do the things that you accuse the church of having done. I don't think that's an issue, really. I mean, you could say that of any human institution. Every human institution has been patriarchal, sexist, gender favourist. And there's got people in it, and you've got to say, look, let's change it for the better. Let's not worry about the past so much, and apologising for things that other people may or may not have done. Let's think about how to make things better.
We're nearly out of time. I think we've probably got time for... Remember though, there's a plenary, right, after this, so there'll be more Q&A, but I think the gentleman that should have had the microphone and didn't have the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I was a bit disappointed because I came to this talk to hear that a kind of real God, omnipotent, omniscient God, but the God that needs to be protected, by 26 male-only club in parliament or something like that. God that needs religious schools, because if you believe in the blue God or red God, you can't be in the same school as other kids, for example. The God that needs as the crimes that was committed in the name of this God, and I speak about Church of England, at least what I know in the public church in Canada, which is the same thing that took, Native Americans, stripped them of their identity, and till now they're all, 75% of those people being in those churches have been diagnosed with PTSD and other things. Not to talk with. Yes, all human institutions have been patriarchal and sexist and all that, but only religious ones claim to be representative of some divine knowledge or divine truth, which is the problem. I am very disappointed that even if Keith's definition and concept of God is very fluffy and I love it, I would defend this kind of concept, but it is not the problem. And I am again disappointed that it is not the common kind of concept of God in Church of England, as Church of England is not a sponsor of freedom of thought, is not a sponsor of freedom of expression, is not a sponsor of peace, is not a sponsor of multiculturalism in the sense that all kids study in the same schools rather than go to another school instead of that.
Thank you. I think we got it. I think we got it. So Keith.
Yeah, I don't see that as a relevant question at all.
Look, we've got a plenary after this. Remember your question, the one that you've got in your head right now, because we'll have a chance to answer it, but to ask it and answer. But I want to invite Francesca up now. In the meantime, just have a 5 to 10 minute break. So you can stretch your legs. You can follow Keith in the meantime. So we'll be back in our seats in exactly 10 minutes.